and the nuclear arms race. We're going to begin here today actually by watching a public service announcement that was put out in Astoria, New York. Now, as we watch this, though, I do want you to be looking at within here some of the ideas that are put forth by and the point of view then that's created by the people that are putting that out there. So it's the educational system out of Astoria, New York, that puts it out. But it's like something that you would watch in school so that you would get to know what we would do in case there was a nuclear attack. So you could survive a nuclear attack, right? So it's kind of a public service thing. But on the surface, obviously, that's what they're doing. That's what, you know, hey, we're going to show kids how to survive a nuclear attack and give people some sense of security. That's what's on the surface. I want you to focus more on the imagery that's going on in the background, not literally in the background, it's in the foreground, but the ideas that are playing out in the background. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, that help to support cultural ideas or cultural norms of this time frame, and then we'll talk about those cultural norms that we see supported in that.
Dum dum, diddle dum dum, diddle dum dum, diddle dum dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and the turtle was very alert. A danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered, ducked and covered. He did what we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you, duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. This is an official civil defense film produced in cooperation with the Federal Civil Defense Administration and in consultation with the Safety Commission of the National Education Association. Produced by Archer Productions, Incorporated. Hey, Bert, come on out and meet all these nice people, please. All right. We really can't blame you. You see, Bert is a very, very careful fellow. When there's danger, this is the way he keeps from being hurt. Sometimes it even saves his life. That's why these children are practicing to duck and cover just as you do in your school. We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Since it may be used against us, we must get ready for it, just as we are ready for many other dangers that are around us all the time. Fire is a danger. It can burn whole buildings if someone is careless. But we are ready for fire. We have a fire department to put out the fire. And you have fire drills in your school, so you'll know what to do. Automobiles can be dangerous, too. They sometimes cause bad accidents, but we're ready. We have safety rules that car drivers and people who are walking must obey. Now, we must be ready for a new danger, the atomic bomb. First, you have to know what happens when an atomic bomb explodes. You will know when it comes. We hope it never comes, but we must get ready. It looks something like this. There is a bright flash, brighter than the sun, brighter than anything you've ever seen. If you are not ready and did not know what to do, it could hurt you in different ways. It could knock you down hard or throw you against a tree or a wall. It is such a big explosion, it can smash in buildings and knock signboards over and break windows all over town. But if you duck and cover like Bert, it will be much safer. You know how bad sunburn can feel. The atomic bomb flash could burn you worse than a terrible sunburn, especially where you're not covered. Now, you and I don't have shells to crawl into like Bert the Turtle, so we have to cover up in our own way. First, you duck, and then you cover. And very tightly, you cover the back of your neck, your face. Duck and cover underneath a table or desk or anything else close by. In Betty's school, they're talking about the atomic bomb, too. Tony is asking her teacher, how can we tell when the atomic bomb may explode? And her teacher is explaining that there are two kinds of attack, with warning and without any warning. We think that most of the time we will be warned before the bomb explodes, so there will be time for us to get into our homes, schools, or some other safe place. Our civil defense workers, our men in uniform, will do everything they can to warn us before enemy planes can bring a bomb near us. You may be in your schoolyard playing when the signal comes. That signal means to stop whatever you are doing and get to the nearest safe place fast. Always remember, the flash of an atomic bomb can come at any time, no matter where you may be. You might be out playing at home when the warning comes. Then be sure to get into the house fast, where your parents have fixed a safe place for you to go. If you are not close to home when you hear the warning, go to the nearest safe cover. Know where you are to go, or ask an older person to help you. You know the places marked with the S sign? They're safe places to go when you hear the alarm. If there is a warning, you will hear it before the bomb explodes. But sometimes, and this is very, very important, sometimes the bomb might explode without any warning. Then the first thing we would know about it would be the flash. And that means duck and cover fast, wherever you are. There's no time to look around or wait. Be like Bert. When there is a flash, duck and cover, and do it fast. Here are some older boys showing what to do if the flash comes when you are not in the classroom. This is what to do if you should be in a corridor. To duck and cover tight against the wall this way. Remember to keep your face and the back of your neck covered tightly. Try to fall away from windows or doors with glass in them. Then, if the glass breaks and flies through the air, it won't cut you. You might be eating your lunch when the flash comes. Duck and cover under the table. Then, if the explosion makes anything in the room fall down, it can't fall on you. Getting ready means we will all have to be able to take care of ourselves. The bomb might explode when there are no grown-ups near. Paul and Patty know this, and they're always ready to take care of themselves. Here they are on their way to school on a beautiful spring day. But no matter where they go or what they do, they always try to remember what to do if the atom bomb explodes right then. It's a bomb. Duck and cover. Paul and Patty know what to do. Paul covered the back of his head so that he burned. And Patty covered herself with the coat she was carrying. They knew how to duck and cover. They acted right away when the flash came. If they had been at this doorway when the bomb flashed, Paul and Patty would have ducked and covered this way, like this girl. Heavy doorways are a good place to duck and cover. She will be safer, too. Here's Tony going to his Cub Scout meeting. Tony knows the bomb can explode any time of the year, day or night. He's ready for it. Duck and cover. Atta boy, Tony, that might mean big plans. Tony knows that it helps to get to any kind of cover. This wall was close by, so that's where he ducked and covered. Tony knew what to do. Notice how he keeps from moving or from getting up and running? He stays down until he is sure the danger is over. The man helping Tony is a civil defense worker. His job is to help protect us when there is danger of the atomic bomb. We must obey the civil defense worker. We must know how to duck and cover in the school bus or in any other bus or streetcar. Duck and cover. Classmate break and through the air. Sundays, holidays, vacation time, we must be ready every day, all the time, to do the right thing if the atomic bomb explodes. Duck and cover. This family knows what to do. We're all sure. They know that even a thin cloth helps protect them. Even a newspaper can save you from a bad burn. The most important thing of all is to duck and cover yourself, especially where your clothes do not cover you. No matter where it is,
Oh no, here we go.
we must be ready all
Goes
the
under
time
the
for
tree.
the atomic bomb. Duck and cover. First thing to do, duck and cover. The next
Actually, I think
important
the
thing to
first
do
thing to
after
do
that
is to take the
is to
track
stay
down here so
covered
it doesn't
until
run
the
over.
danger is over.
Yeah.
He's like,
Yes, we must all get ready now, so we know how to save ourselves if the atomic bomb ever explodes near us. If you do not know just what to do, ask your teacher when this film is over. Discuss what you could do in different places if a bomb explodes. Older people know
Yeah,
as they
Johnson.
always do. There might not be any grown-ups around when the bomb explodes.
remember what to do, friends. Now tell me right out loud. What are you supposed to do when you see the flash?
Duck and cover. Whoa.
Okay,
Let's arrange this for full orchestra.
Yes.
okay, so now,
Illuminati.
so what kind of themes, ideas, kind of a point of view about what society should look like did you see within that film?
We saw blacks were actually integrated with the whites.
Okay,
Yeah.
so based on periodization, we would probably guess then that this was filmed after Brown v. Board of Education in 1954. Does that
Yes.
make sense?
Yeah.
Because that's when federally we have to integrate schools.
Yes.
Now, it is a possibility that it is previous to that. I'm not 100% positive when this was out, but it is in the 50s, 60s, somewhere in there. Because it's 1954. Because of the fact that it was filmed in Astoria, New York, right? Which has the possibility of being more integrated than, say, if we were filming this in Mississippi, right?
Yeah.
Mississippi would be a much different look of our classroom. What other kinds of things did you see?
Well,
Happy families.
Okay, be more specific about those
The
families.
mom, the dad, and 2 kids having lunch on a Sunday all together.
Okay, what was the role of mom and dad?
The mom stayed home and the dad went to work, I
Ye-
guess.
Yeah, and if you notice, the only roles in which women were working was as
Teachers.
the teacher, right?
Mhm.
But otherwise, mom's at home, bye-bye kids, have a good day at school. Well, then the people that are putting out, they're reinforcing what point of view?
women should stay at home.
That women's place
Is
is
in the home.
in the home taking care of children. And even if she's in the workforce, her place is still
With children.
taking care of children. Does that make sense? As a teacher, she's still caring for children. Okay? That's a woman's role. You notice all the people in a position of authority were men. The police officer was a
Was a man.
guy. The person that the girl went to ask help from was a guy. The civil service defense worker was a
Guy.
man. Okay? So, we're reinforcing that gender role, right?
Yep.
What other kinds of things was the film reinforcing about society? In the
Think of, like-
classroom, well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just trying to think of like specific scenes and stuff. I don't quite.
Would it have been normal then for, like, if a child wanted to ask a question, they had to stand?
Yes,
That was
That
like a
sounds
polite
so
thing.
tiresome.
okay? But it's,
Polite.
yeah,
Like for the
but it's
time.
also submitting to the authority of the teacher within the classroom. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing that behavior then be modeled and saying, this is what the good behavior of children looks like, right? They raise their hand and stand up when they have a question. They ask questions. What did you notice about what the kids were wearing?
Oh, the girls were wearing like dresses and the boys were wearing like pants and
Pants and a
coat, shirt.
tie, and when they walked in, as there's a bomb, and they have to get inside the building. And if you look closely, the young gentlemen are putting on their blazers, right? Putting on their sport coats, okay, to go
tiny
inside because
Yeah.
you need to be well dressed at school, right?
You need to be well dressed when an atomic bomb hits.
And the girls, if you noticed also, their skirts were
Long.
they were long. They were pretty long, actually. They were here, okay?
Yeah.
What kinds of things were the girls doing on the playground? Jump roping. What were the boys doing?
Football.
Sports.
Sports.
Baseball.
Football. Riding a bike, right?
Yeah, but
Okay.
women couldn't do
But
that.
girls jump rope. So it's okay for girls to have physical activity, right? But as long as it's not sport. Does that make sense? So what you see on the surface, right, we are training people about what to do in case there's a nuclear bomb. Even in the picnic, right, the father is attending the fire. Oh, fire, manly, right? The
woman is
mom
with the
is telling her
cheerleader.
son, don't eat that, right? I don't know if you saw it, but she basically pulls something out of his mouth that he's trying to eat.
The hat.
Okay? And so, again, we're reinforcing those roles of how children are to behave, how women are to behave in society. Even though the classroom may have been integrated, I don't know if you guys noticed this because they didn't catch it in my other class. The Africans, there's only like
Two.
a few African students in there. Okay?
Yeah, no.
There's like two. A boy and a girl.
The boy, did anybody notice his posture and compared to his classmates' posture? Yeah, he's like this. It's like he's bored. Everybody else is like this, like they're really intently listening to what the teacher has to say. And the young African American male is like,
kind of weird.
I'm bored. So is it reinforcing a racial stereotype that existed in the United States?
Does our usual poor posture offend you, Mrs. Johnson?
No.
Excuse me, EDC,
Okay.
Good luck, you can go back.
You'll do fabulously.
I had a question.
Yes.
Like now, do they have procedures for the atomic bomb?
Not for an atomic bomb because largely
You're screwed.
it would be mutually assured destruction and we'd all be dead. However, we have similar types of things to this. We do drills for fire drills all the time. We do tornado drills. We do shelter in place drills, right?
We don't do earthquake
Okay.
drills.
Not here,
Not
but
here
I bet you if
because-
we lived in California we would do earthquake drills.
Yep.
Okay? I bet
And
you
half
in
the
other
class
places
is
where they're
gone.
seeing greater seismic activity, such as in Oklahoma right now because of oil and stuff like that, they're considering at least doing more of that sort of thing.
We should have a winter drill, which is
Right?
why we don't leave our house.
We don't do them because we don't need to. But if we were living in that situation, we would probably have those types of drills. So ultimately then, we see a lot of those things reinforced. Also, who was teaching the other students what to do and demonstrating what to do?
An older boy.
Be more specific.
The older teenage boy.
The older what colored skin
White
boys?
boys.
White boys. There is an older black boy standing there watching them demonstrate, right? But it's the older white boys, right, that are demonstrating the right way to behave. So here's what you need to understand when you are looking at older film, whether it's this or movies. We will do an analysis and look at I Love Lucy and some of those, Leave It to Beaver, things like that. But the reality of it is part of any of this that's out there helps to reinforce and to shape public opinion about the proper way to behave in a society. Now, synthesis then, right, or CCOT, does our media today shape the way we are to behave in society?
I don't know, there's a lot more serial killer shows out there, and I don't think they want serial killers. Or
I
people
think
looking
those-
bad, you know.
I think those are intended for shock value, so you know not to do that though. You know what I mean?
Yeah?
But it also gives like full permission to be serial killers like Dexter and stuff like that.
Dexter's
Well,
a
I mean,
good
and some of
show.
those I don't watch, but some of the police dramas like Law and Order SVU, at the end, who wins?
They always get the bad guy.
They get the bad guy,
It
right?
takes like 15
Okay.
episodes.
Yeah.
They
Oh.
But they get the bad guy, right? So, I mean, is it still reinforcing that kind of idea of don't do this because
All the Disney
eventually you
movies.
will get caught?
Yeah. All the Disney movies. Like,
Disney movies.
not so much on the gender role thing. They've been challenging that for a while. But as far as like the good guy versus bad guy thing. You definitely get the whole, like, the bad guy, it doesn't end well for them.
Yeah,
Ever.
ever. Bad guys don't win, right? Okay.
Unless you're Dr. Facilitator.
It just doesn't work like that. Even, I would argue that our acceptance in mainstream culture of things like, for example, homosexuality is largely because of more mainstream media. Okay? Because it's on television. So you, as a generation, have been exposed to it pretty thoroughly, and there are students in our building who are openly LGBT, okay? Why? Because they feel safe to do so. Now, I get that I'm older than you, but I'm not that much older than you, but when I was your age, these things were just starting to come out on television. And there was a lot of controversy surrounding it. In fact, Ellen DeGeneres used to have a sitcom that when she came out as gay, and subsequently her character, which was named after herself and was basically herself, the show was canceled because she was a lesbian. And they made no bones about the fact that that's why the show was canceled. All right? So within that, then, it became a little bit more in the mainstream, and now as a result of that, I would argue that's why, as students today, you're more open to other people in that nature. Whereas there were gay students when I was in high school, but they were not out in the open by any means. After high school, yes, okay? But during high school, no, okay? So, question?
Yeah, I was gonna say that kind of goes, like my mom was telling me a story about how when she was in high school, one of her classmates committed suicide because he got bullied because he was gay.
Yeah.
You don't see that a lot, like now.
Not as much by any means.
Not as
Does it occur? Yes. Is it as frequent or as often? I don't think so. Okay? But I think a lot of that has to do with your generational acceptance of people who are LGBTQ. I don't remember all the acronyms 100%. Okay. Well, what? LGBTQ A+. Okay. So, right?
I don't know
So,
what that means.
but it allows for that greater acceptance. Does that make sense? Okay. So, that being said, our communism and our fear of communism continues to spread and become pervasive in our government, largely because of the fall of China. If you remember, in 1947, Truman creates the National Security Council, which is the NSC, and the NSC then will help to dictate what our security policies will be as a result or in order to deal with this policy of containment. Well, one of the documents that they release is shortly after the fall of China to communism, and it will lead us down a path that leads us into Korea and subsequently into Vietnam. That document, NSC 68, becomes our blueprint for what to do with foreign policy for the Cold War. And it basically says that we needed to find the weak spot in our enemy's armor, which is communism is our enemy here, right? Okay? And that we needed to do everything that we could to basically break the back of communism. Within this document, they argue whether we want to ensure that people are free to be able to make their own choices and to be self-determinant about their government, or if they basically want to be enslaved by a government who has greater control of them. It endorses covert action, spying, the use of the CIA, the use of economic pressure, and continued use of things like the Marshall Doctrine, okay? What does the Marshall Plan, what does the Marshall Plan do?
To promote democracy rather than communism.
Perfect, okay? It encouraged using propaganda, such as what we saw post-Berlin airlift, and also with Truman's Voice of America program, and it also included a massive military buildup, okay? Now, the whole purpose of this and the whole portrayal of this is for our defense, right? To protect democracy and to protect the freedoms of those throughout the world. It largely then will play out first in Korea and then, like I said, in Vietnam. At the end of World War II, Korea had been basically a colony of Japan. Japan had come in, taken over Korea as a whole. They had control of it. At the end, Korea, much like Germany, gets divided into spheres of influence. The North gets controlled by the Soviet Union. The South gets controlled by the United States, Great Britain, and France, pro-democracy, okay? The North then, at the end, we see it divided along that 38th parallel. The North becomes a communist state controlled by Kim Jong-il, I think is the right Kim. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's Kim Jong-il, if I remember correctly. And in the North, then, we will put in place an individual who is pro-democracy. I'm trying to find his name here. Sorry, I don't see his name here. So he's pro-democracy, okay? Now, it's working okay, and in fact, the Soviet Union and the United States largely pull out of Korea to leave it to its own devices. Well, in early 1950, the North decides to invade into South Korea. And by September of 1950, they've been largely able to invade and push the forces down to this spot. So all that was controlled by the UN is this little itty bitty bit left of South Korea. Okay? Now, when North Korea invades, the United States will go to the UN Security Council and argue that we needed to go to the mutual defense of South Korea. Now, it works really, really well for us, the timing, because the Soviet Union has just boycotted the Security Council because of China not being recognized by the Security Council, People's Republic of China. Okay? So we're like, and maneuver around you. And the UN supports us. But largely it's U.S. forces that are going in to fight the North Koreans. Led by General Douglas MacArthur, that force initially is very much overwhelmed. However, MacArthur will take a strategic, basically, maneuver that largely allows the United States to be able to push back. And what he does is he will take kind of a surprise amphibious landing at Incheon right here, and he comes in behind enemy lines and then sweeps north, which forces the North Koreans to come back up to defeat MacArthur. Now MacArthur continues north and keeps moving north. Now, Congress initially does not support the war. However, Truman sells it to Congress by saying that, look, it's not actually a war. This is just a limited police action that we need to do to stop the spread of communism and to prevent South Korea going the way that China did. And so Congress does not actually ever declare war. Officially, the Korean War is a conflict. It is not a war. Does that make sense? Officially. If it was a war, it would have had to be approved by Congress. So it's only ever a conflict, not actually a war. Now, in reality, is it a war? Yes. But officially, it's the Korean conflict. Okay? But they begin pushing and moving, and Truman's able to push up to that red line up there. Now here's the problem with that red line. China and their border is right there, right? And we're like, hey, let's keep going. And in fact, MacArthur is like, you know what? What's to stop us from going into China? Why can't we push farther north into China and basically force China back towards a democracy and away from a communism. This is going to work perfect. This is
Oh, boy.
great.
Oh boy.
Probably wouldn't work perfectly.
Yeah, except for it probably wouldn't work that well, and Truman takes that exact stance. MacArthur, stop it. Stop it right now, okay? Literally, he does. He tells MacArthur to stop and to not move any farther north. MacArthur, though, does not heed Truman's warning,
No.
and it continues to try to push north, so the Chinese
All over again.
say, if you continue to move north, we will protect our border
How do they even
by
do
any means necessary. You have to understand what's above China and also in an alliance with China, Russia, right?
Was he gonna?
Hence why Truman tells MacArthur, stop it, okay? Don't keep going north. This isn't good. So, China though, seeing them moving north, China sends 300,000 troops towards MacArthur and towards the U.S. troops.
How many of
That'd be
the?
fun
How many
if
of
it
them
was
are
just
us?
Ford MacArthur.
What's that?
How much? How much of?
How many? What was our forces?
Yeah. What do we have?
Not that many.
Okay.
We had numbers varied throughout the conflict, but I believe, if I remember correctly, our maximum amount of number were somewhere in the range of like 300,000.
What and what did they send?
And they are not 300,000. I'm sorry. They send about 300,000. Our maximum number, I think, was actually closer to about half of that, maybe.
Oh
at the
yeah. Well,
most.
this is gonna go really well.
This is not going to go well. That's the idea here. And also, here's the thing, right? If we push north into China, China's backed up by the USSR. It's not going to do very, very well, right? And so as a result of that, the Chinese are basically able to push us back to the 38th parallel. And we kind of wind up duking it out at the 38th parallel for a while. MacArthur says, look, we cannot have a limited war. We need to have a war with a victory here. Okay? We can't just be like, oh, we'll just let it go.
But it's not a war. It's a conflict.
And that's what Truman's arguing. He's saying this is not a war, it's a conflict. I'm your commander-in-chief. Obey orders. Keep your mouth shut.
I bet he was a really grumpy
Okay.
president.
Well, if you have MacArthur to deal with, I mean, MacArthur's a pretty, like, okay?
Yesterday I hypothesized that Truman took a nap and then woke up and found out 25% of the world was communist and completely flipped his lid and screamed at everyone in the White House. I mean, that's how I would have felt.
Probably sometime of the like, but I don't know for sure. But by the end of 1950, we see China in the war. The ceasefire doesn't come, though, until 1953. Even though we begin talks of an armistice and peace talks in July of 51, that fighting continues along the 38th parallel for an additional 2 years. Now, during that 2 years' time, though, Truman and MacArthur basically go at odds. Because MacArthur says, look, this is turning into a long, drawn-out event, and we need to basically hit the Chinese where it hurts the most. And we have this really big weapon.
Ta-da, wink, wink,
No.
nudge.
Wait, nod, nod. Let's use it, right? Well, here's the thing. It's 1953.
The USSR also has nukes, right?
Yes, and they also have hydrogen bombs, and so do we. It's more than just an atomic bomb. We now also, both of us, have hydrogen bombs, right?
Oh boy.
So it's mutually assured destruction. If we launch a nuclear weapon at China, you can bet that the USSR is going to launch one at the United States.
Boom, boom.
Boom, boom, we're all dead, right? So Truman tells MacArthur to knock it off and to not speak publicly about trying to push more and push against the Chinese. MacArthur, being kind of just, he's just kind of a bull. I'm going to take this by the horns and we're going to do this my way. That's just kind of MacArthur's personality, okay? And instead of keeping his mouth shut about what was going on, or his disagreement with Truman, he makes it very public, his dislike of Truman's decision and his opinion about the war. He argues that there is no substitute for victory, and that by Truman not allowing him to push into North Korea or be more aggressive against the Chinese, that Truman was being soft on communism. He calls for an all-out defensive and continues to publicly criticize Truman. Now, here's the problem. Truman is what to MacArthur?
His boss.
His boss. And not just his boss, but his boss. His commander-in-chief, right?
His boss's boss's boss.
His boss's boss's boss, yeah.
Yeah.
He is the dude in charge, right? Okay? And as a result of him being the dude in charge, MacArthur really should have just been like, okay, I obey your order. But it's MacArthur. So MacArthur doesn't. So MacArthur gets fired and told to come home. Okay?
Really? That's how the movie was true.
But MacArthur, unlike somebody who returns home and to like people being like, MacArthur, how dare you speak out against Truman? MacArthur returns home a hero, and parades are thrown in his honor. And most Americans agreed with MacArthur that this shouldn't be a limited war, and that we shouldn't substitute this limited conflict for not having a victory, that we should have been victorious. And the Democrats basically say, or the Republicans argue, that the Democrats are being appeasers and are not trying to destroy communism, and that they're being soft, and that we needed to do something more. But here's what Korea does for us, and what you need to understand about Korea, okay? Is that we have the ability from Korea to see that containment could work. Communism didn't spread. Yes, we go right back to the 38th parallel, which was where we started at, but communism didn't spread. So did containment work?
Yes.
Yes, but it no longer worked to use just money or to just use words to contain communism. We're going to have to use our military to contain communism. And so it leads to a drastic military buildup in the United States, and is used to justify the creation and the building of new jet bombers and new technology, like the B-52. Okay. In the end, 2.5 million people die in the Korean conflict. Of those, 54,000 are Americans. So far more Koreans and civilians die in the conflict. But that's what modern warfare is at this point in time in history. It's not war that we can specifically target just people wearing a uniform, because we don't stand in a front line anymore and shoot at each other. War will bring about civilian casualties. Even with the use of drones, war still brings about civilian casualties. Because we don't go to a field of battle anymore and fight each other in gentleman's warfare, while people basically watch on the distant hills like it's a football game or something. Okay? War changes.
Could people actually do that? Like, they would sit and watch people fight?
They did that during the Civil War.
They did during the Civil War, during the Revolutionary War. Yeah. It was an event to go watch, but you could go watch it from a distance because of the fact that they were fighting just each other. Okay? Versus using bombs and everything else to fight everybody. Now, as president, we've talked a lot about Truman as far as his military policies. But the Cold War isn't the only thing about Truman's presidency, okay? During Truman's presidency, we are seeing a rise of consumerism again. We're seeing the nation be really confident about our growth, a lot of conformity, but at the same time, thank you, we will see the growth of the civil rights movement beginning in his presidency. Now, we're not going to talk about the civil rights movement just yet because there's next chapter is basically civil rights. Does that make sense? And so we're not going to talk about it a whole lot. But when we look at this time, there's a lot of conflicting ideas about his presidency and about the 50s into the early 60s of whether or not, like, it's this kind of Happy Days. How many of you have seen that old TV show, Happy Days? Sort of. No, I'm getting that old. Okay, watch it. But anyways, this idea that everything's good and we're just happy and living here in America and everything's great. Or if it's really actually a time of a lot of anxiety and unrest and uneasiness about what was really going on. And as a result of that, it leads to the Red Scare. And as a result of that, it leads to Americans creating change in some essences, for example, in the civil rights movement, but also trying to go back to the way things were when it comes to women in American culture during the 50s and 60s. Yes, ma'am?
So it's like the era of good feelings.
Yes.
Okay.
Or like the Gilded Age, right? Where on the surface, things look really good, but underneath, there's this turmoil that exists in our society, okay? Now, when it comes to Truman, we will see, when it comes to civil rights, and we'll talk more about this later, but he will actually in 46 create the Committee on Civil Rights Movement, and then in 47 he gets a report that says that the United States needs to do whatever we can do to secure the rights of African Americans, and so as a result of that in 48 we get the passage of the Civil Rights Act, okay? And so these are things then that will lead to the continued development of that Civil Rights Act. We'll see Jackie Robinson break the colored barrier, 54, Brown v. Board overturns Plessy v. Ferguson. So we're beginning to see some of those ideas. Does that make sense? Coming to fruition. When it comes to post-war politics, there are some things that we have to take care of because of what we were left with. And so FDR serves 3 full terms, is elected for a 4th term, but remember he dies within a few months of actually taking the office during his 4th term of presidency. Washington sets a precedent that every president should only serve 2 terms. After Washington, does anyone else serve more than 2 terms?
Just him.
Just FDR, right? That's it. Did anybody else try to serve more than 2 terms?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Theodore Roosevelt, right? Theodore Roosevelt ran for what would have been a 3rd term, but he said, it's okay because they weren't sequential terms. There was a break in there, so I'm not violating that whole 2-term precedent set up by Washington. But after FDR, America looks at this whole idea of having a president that could literally, had FDR survived his 4th term, do you think that he could have ran for a 5th term?
Depending on how successful.
He also
Probably.
He died.
He probably could have contained the presidency until he died. Why? Because it's FDR. Look at this, right? Well, I mean, flat out. As far as Americans were concerned, he ended the Great Depression, right? He allowed victory in World War II against both the Germans and against the Japanese. So based off of that, he probably would have been elected for a 5th term in office, depending on how things were going for him during the course of the Cold War. But Truman, even with his loss of China to communism, is reelected. So even if FDR would have lost China to communism, he probably would have been elected, and that wouldn't have been a factor for him. Does that make sense? But the problem with being elected to 4 terms, possibly an indefinite number of terms, is what?
King Franklin.
King Franklin, right?
It's no longer a democracy, it's a monarchy.
And it doesn't become a democracy anymore. It becomes more of a monarchy or an oligarchy, right? A rule by a few people, which
We have already.
we kind of have already anyways, or we currently have because the people that are in positions of power are largely the wealthy representatives of our society because of campaigning. But anyways, that could pose a problem to our democracy, right? And so Congress looks at that and they're like, we need to change that. Because if FDR can do it, could anybody else after him do it? Why not? If they're supported enough by the people to be voted in, they could do that, right? So Congress takes to making an amendment to change the office of the presidency. So it's no longer just assumed that you would only serve 2 terms in office. But by the 22nd Amendment, you must not serve more than 10 years in office. Now, that is 2 terms plus the possibility of you taking over a term. Does that make sense?
Oh, so if you were like vice president?
So if you were vice president and the president dies, let's say he served 2 years of his term, right? So he dies, you could actually run for election twice. Now let's say you're FDR, right? FDR dies within the first year, so Truman actually served how many years of that term?
Like
Pretty
11?
much the whole part.
Okay? Pretty much the whole thing, right? So
Yeah.
he serves basically 3.5 years, well, more than that, 3.75 years, right? Of FDR's term, having had been FDR's vice president, okay? And then the problem becomes, okay, now we need to look at with that. So then does he get 2 of his own terms or what? Well, if Truman would not have been able to get 2 of his own terms because he served so many years after taking over for FDR. Okay? Does that make sense how that works? So 10 years maximum as the president. In addition to that, we see labor unrest in the United States grow subsequent to the war. It makes sense because you had this whole group of people, huge portion of our population, overseas fighting a war, right? And now they're going to return home from being overseas fighting that war. Now what? They want to come back to their jobs, right? But who's working in those jobs?
Other people.
That are different.
People that are different. More specifically, African Americans and minorities, right? And so when we have those minorities working in those positions, now these white men are coming home. It's easy to kick women back home, okay? Go home and raise some babies. It's more difficult to remove other men from those positions because they get paid less. And it's easier for a company to hire someone who I can pay less, right? Because it means I'm going to make more money than to hire somebody else. So there's a lot of labor unrest in the United States. And as a result, Truman has to act on that, requiring then that there would be an 80-day negotiation period prior to a worker being able to go on strike. Now that is put forward by Taft and Hartley. They are 2 Congress members from the Republican Party. Taft is the grandson of William Howard Taft, our former president.
Cool.
Okay. So it's that Taft, that dude.
Sometimes I feel kind of bad for like presidents' grandchildren because it's just like, what are you doing with your life? I thought, you know, your great grandfather was president. He was great. What are you doing?
What are you doing? I work at Walmart. But when we look at that, here's the other problem, right? Prior to 1947, there is nothing in our system that says legally who would become the next president. It's assumed it will be the VP, but there's nothing written down. So as a result, 47, let's actually write it down in the 25th Amendment. And it literally goes,
So
Oh my
so
God,
it talks
imagine
about
all those
amendments
people were like,
22
hold on.
and 25.
All the way down the
Well,
line.
that's why when they have like
we'll
meetings
talk
and
about
stuff,
23 and
they're
24.
gonna put that on there.
I think that'd be funny, to be honest with you, if you were suddenly left with the last person in the line of secession.
Well, isn't that like?
They would literally mean, in order to be, for the Secretary of Homeland Security to become president, you would literally have to have every single person before them, 17 people,
Die.
die.
I find
Like,
it
what
weird
if
that
they don't
the
wanna be
Secretary of
president?
Agriculture goes before, like, some of those other ones.
I know, isn't it odd, some of those?
Yeah.
Yeah.